Today we bring you another episode in our series, The Vanished, the sad, strange disappearance of Mark Selby. Join us now. On this channel, we discuss missing person cases of all kinds. Sometimes the missing are found unharmed, relatively unscathed. Often there's a simple explanation, a misunderstanding, a misadventure. Those stories usually end with a happy homecoming, and there's no need to dig deeper. But then there are the other cases, the ones that start ordinary and then spiral into confusion, contradiction, and things that just don't add up. Today is one of those cases. What happened to Mark Selby? A hunter from the small town of Pine Ridge, nestled in the shadow of the mountains, went into the woods and didn't come home. He was supposed to be back for dinner. This is a story that begins like many others and then becomes something else entirely. Mark Selby, 45 years old, was a man of routine and quiet dedication. His wife, Helen, knew his rhythms like her own heartbeat. So when the clock ticked past dinner time on October 17, 2018, a small seed of worry was planted. By midnight, that seed had grown into a suffocating vine of dread. She called the sheriff's department, her voice trembling as she explained that her husband, an experienced hunter who knew the local woods better than his own backyard, was missing. His pickup truck was found the next day on a remote Forest Service road, a place he often parked. The vehicle was locked, the keys were missing, and his phone was lying on the passenger seat, turned off, a silent monument to his last known whereabouts. The initial search was extensive, a flurry of activity against a backdrop of silent, imposing wilderness. They searched for a week with dogs and a helicopter, a modern effort against an ancient, indifferent landscape. They combed through the entire forest in that area. Every trail, every gully, every thicket. They found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no dropped piece of equipment. No traces. Mark Selby had vanished into thin air. He knew these places intimately, having hunted there for more than 2 decades, since he was a young man following in his father's footsteps. He couldn't have just gotten lost. That was the fact his family clung to, the one the sheriff's deputies repeated with growing unease. For 5 long years, no one knew what had happened to the hunter. His family held on to a fading, ragged hope that he was alive, perhaps having chosen to disappear, a possibility that was both comforting and agonizing. The police checked every report of unidentified bodies, every lead turning out to be a dead end, a fresh wave of disappointment for a family trapped in limbo. On the morning of October 17, 2018, Mark Selby woke at 4 a.m., a familiar ritual before a hunt. The house on the outskirts of Pine Ridge was steeped in the deep silence that precedes the dawn. His wife and teenage son, David, were still asleep, unaware that this morning was different from all the others. The 45-year-old machinist from the local mill gathered his equipment with a practiced, methodical calm that was the hallmark of his personality. A .30-06 rifle, well-oiled and cared for, a box of ammunition, a thermos of black coffee, steaming and potent, and a couple of sandwiches wrapped carefully in wax paper. It was a crisp 38 degrees outside, and a thick, ghostly fog clung to the valleys, muting the world in a shroud of gray. Mark had been hunting these woods for over 20 years and knew every trail within a 30-mile radius of the town. He planned to spend the day in the ridges north of Highway 2, where he'd seen elk sign the week before. He kissed his sleeping wife goodbye, a light touch on her cheek, and whispered that he would be back for dinner. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the familiar rumble of his gray 2005 Dodge pickup truck broke the morning stillness. He drove along his familiar route, the headlights cutting through the lingering fog. Mark was last seen at 6:20 a.m. at the Sinclair gas station on the edge of town, its fluorescent lights an island of artificial day in the pre-dawn gloom. The clerk, A young woman named Brenda, who was working her way through college, knew him by sight. He often stopped there for gas before heading into the mountains. Mark bought a chocolate bar and a bottle of orange juice, paying with a crumpled $5 bill from his worn leather wallet. He seemed his usual self, quiet and polite, offering a small smile and a nod. The cashier didn't notice anything unusual, no hint of anxiety or distraction in his calm blue eyes. A grainy surveillance camera, mounted high on the wall, recorded him getting into his pickup and driving north on the highway, disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom, becoming just another set of taillights fading into the vast, dark landscape. The weather that day was clear once the morning fog burned off, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. There was almost no wind. It was by all accounts perfect conditions for hunting. Mark knew several good spots about 15 miles from town where the animals would come out to feed in the clearings, places he had discovered over years of patient exploration. He was a creature of habit, a man who found comfort in routine and predictability. He always returned home before dark, the smell of pine and cold air clinging to his clothes. He never stayed in the woods overnight. It was a rule he lived by, a promise he always kept to his family. This adherence to routine is what made his absence so immediately alarming. It wasn't just that he was late. It was that he was breaking a pattern he had followed for more than 2 decades, a pattern as reliable as the rising of the sun. When Mark hadn't returned by 8 p.m., his wife, Helen, began to worry. He was meticulously punctual and always, without fail, called if he was running late for any reason. His cell phone went straight to voicemail, a cold, automated response that did little to soothe her rising panic. At 9, she called his hunting partner, a man named Gary, who said he hadn't spoken to Mark in a few days and didn't know his specific plans for the day. By 11 p.m., a knot of dread tightening in her stomach, Helen contacted the sheriff's department. Deputy Miller, who was on duty that night, took her statement with a practiced air of weary patience, but explained that a person could only be officially reported as missing after 24 hours had passed. The family says they were dismissed. Their urgent pleas met with bureaucratic procedure. He advised her to call his friends and relatives again. Helen spent a sleepless night, the silence of the house deafening, calling everyone she could think of. No one had seen Mark or knew where he might be. The next morning, on October 18th, a haggard and sleep-deprived Helen returned to the sheriff's office. This time she spoke with Detective Frank Thompson, a veteran officer who specialized in missing persons cases. The 50-year-old detective, with 25 years of experience etched into the lines on his face, took the report seriously. Hunters went missing in these mountains from time to time, usually due to accidents, sudden changes in weather, or getting disoriented in the vast, rugged terrain. Detective Thompson organized a search operation to begin that afternoon, recognizing that the first 48 hours were critical. The local volunteer search and rescue team, led by a seasoned outdoorsman named Bill Jensen, was called in to assist. This team was composed of men and women who knew the local wilderness intimately, their dedication fueled by a sense of community and a shared understanding of the dangers the mountains held. The first order of business was to find Mark's truck. They fanned out, a small army of volunteers and deputies, checking all the access roads and trailheads within a 20-mile radius of town in the direction he was last seen traveling. After a few hours of painstaking searching, a volunteer found the gray Dodge pickup on a dusty, remote logging road about 12 miles north of Pine Ridge. The truck was parked neatly on the shoulder, locked, with the keys gone. This spot was a well-known starting point for local hunters, a gateway to the deep woods. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no indication of foul play. It appeared Mark had parked his truck and walked into the forest, just as he had done countless times before. A routine departure into a wilderness that had, this time, failed to return him. The scene was eerily normal, a placid surface that masked a terrifying unknown. Detective Thompson called in a forensics team to examine the vehicle, hoping to find some clue, however small. Inside the cab, they found the usual items that accompanied Mark on his hunting trips: detailed topographical maps of the area, a spare jacket folded neatly on the seat, an empty thermos that still held the faint scent of coffee, and the wrapper from the chocolate bar he had purchased that morning. His rifle and his well-worn hunting pack were missing, which meant Mark had taken them with him, fully equipped for a day in the woods. His cell phone was on the passenger seat, its screen dark and lifeless, powered down. The last outgoing call was to his wife, the previous morning, a brief, loving conversation that now seemed like a relic from another lifetime. The lack of any unusual evidence was, in itself, unsettling, leaving the investigators with more questions than answers. The search and rescue team immediately began a grid search of the forest near where the truck was found, a massive undertaking in the dense, challenging terrain. The tracking dogs, their senses far more acute than any humans, picked up a scent from the driver's side door and led the team into the woods along an established game trail. The trail was clear for the first mile, a path Mark had likely walked many times. Then, as the terrain grew more rugged and steep, the trail began to fade. 2 miles from the road, the path split in 3 directions, a crossroads in the wilderness. It was here that the dogs lost the scent, the trail going cold on the hard, rocky ground. The search party divided into 3 groups, each taking a different path, their voices swallowed by the immense silence of the forest. They searched until darkness fell, their headlamps cutting feeble beams into the profound blackness, but they found no sign of Mark. The next day, a helicopter was brought in to aid the search, its rotors beating a stark, mechanical rhythm against the natural quiet of the mountains. A pilot flew over the entire area, the vast expanse of trees a dizzying carpet of green and brown below. They scanned the clearings and dense stands of timber, looking for any splash of unnatural color, any sign of a campfire, anything out of place. They found nothing. The search continued for a week, a grueling, emotionally draining effort for both the volunteers and the family. Volunteers on foot and on horseback combed through every ravine, every cave, and every abandoned cabin in the area. They interviewed other hunters who had been in the woods that day. 2 men reported seeing a lone hunter in a camouflage jacket that morning, but they were too far away to be certain it was Mark. No other witnesses were found. By the end of October, with no new leads and the first snow of winter beginning to fall, the official search operation was called off. A painful but necessary decision. Detective Thompson reclassified the case as a missing person, but the investigation continued, moving from the field to the office. He checked hospitals within a 200-mile radius, contacted law enforcement in neighboring states, and meticulously examined Mark's financial records and phone logs. There were no suspicious transactions, no unusual activity, no hidden life waiting to be uncovered. Mark's family, desperate for answers, hired a private investigator, a former state trooper named Jack Riley, with a reputation for finding people who didn't want to be found. Riley conducted his own thorough investigation, interviewing Mark's friends, neighbors, and co-workers, digging into his past, looking for any hint of trouble or discontent. He found no evidence of foul play, no enemies, no hidden debts, or secret relationships. Mark Selby was, by all accounts, exactly who he appeared to be. A quiet, hard-working family man with a deep love for the outdoors. That winter was exceptionally harsh, blanketing the mountains in a deep, unforgiving layer of snow. Mark's family clung to the fragile hope that he had found shelter, perhaps in an old, forgotten cabin, and was waiting out the winter somewhere in the vast wilderness. But when spring arrived and the snow melted, revealing the forest floor once more, no new clues emerged. It was as if Mark Selby had simply stepped off the face of the earth on that crisp October morning. His wife, Helen, was forced to file a petition to have him declared legally dead 2 years later, a heartbreaking necessity for dealing with the insurance and the mortgage, a legal fiction that felt like a betrayal of her enduring hope. But she never stopped believing that Mark was alive. Every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, she would place a single red rose on the dashboard of his old truck, which she kept parked in their driveway, a silent, poignant vigil. 5 years passed with no answers. 5 years of birthdays and holidays marked by a painful absence. The Mark Selby case went cold, the file growing thicker with dead-end leads and unanswered questions, eventually being filed away in the archives of the sheriff's department. From time to time, Detective Thompson, a man who took every unsolved case personally, would pull out the file, rereading the reports, studying the maps, looking for something, anything he might have missed. A small detail that could unlock the entire mystery. The town of Pine Ridge, too, held on to the memory of the missing hunter, a cautionary tale told to children, a lingering shadow over the beautiful but dangerous mountains that surrounded them. The disappearance became a piece of local folklore, a mystery that seemed destined to remain unsolved. Then, on a sweltering afternoon in August of 2023, a man named Daniel Cross walked into the sheriff's office. He was nervous, his hands shaking, his eyes darting around the room as if he expected to be followed. He told the deputy at the front desk that he had information about the missing hunter from 5 years ago. Detective Thompson, now nearing retirement and having seen his share of false leads and crackpot theories, was called in. He listened patiently as Cross told a rambling, almost unbelievable story, his voice a low, urgent whisper. He claimed he knew where to find Mark Selby's body. It was a bombshell dropped into the quiet stillness of a 5-year-old cold case, a potential breakthrough that was as shocking as it was unexpected. After years of silence, the first crack in the wall of mystery had appeared. Daniel Cross was a 42-year-old drifter, a man on the margins of society, known to local law enforcement for a string of petty crimes and public intoxication offenses. He had recently been working as a handyman on a remote ranch owned by a man named Arthur Bishop, about 20 miles from where Mark's truck had been found 5 years earlier. Cross looked haunted, his eyes wide with a fear that seemed genuine. According to Cross, a few days earlier, he had been working near an old, dilapidated barn on the property when he overheard a heated argument between his employer, Bishop, and another man. They were talking about the need to dig something up before selling a piece of the land. One of them, in a moment of anger, mentioned the name Mark and said he'd been sleeping out there for 5 years. Cross, fearing for his own safety, had fled the ranch in the middle of the night and come straight to the police, his conscience, or his fear, compelling him to speak. Detective Thompson was, by nature and by training, skeptical. Cross could be making it all up, hoping for a reward or leniency on some other charge. Still, after 5 years of absolute silence, this was the first concrete lead, however tenuous. He decided to look into it. Arthur Bishop's ranch was situated in a secluded valley, a good hour's drive from town, a place where people could keep to themselves. Bishop, a 60-year-old man who had inherited the property, lived alone and had a reputation in the community for being a recluse, a man who kept his gates locked and his business private. Thompson dug into Bishop's background. The rancher had a sealed juvenile record and a few minor offenses as an adult, but nothing violent. However, a deeper check revealed a connection to a man named Samuel Kane, who had a long and storied history of poaching and illegal trapping in the area. A man whose name was often whispered in connection with other unsolved incidents in the county. The connection between the reclusive rancher Bishop and the known poacher Kane was deeply unsettling. Kane was known to be volatile and had been a person of interest in other disappearances over the years, though nothing was ever proven. Detective Thompson decided not to rush in, but to first set up surveillance on the ranch, a patient, watchful game. For a week, undercover officers in plain vehicles watched the property from a distance, using binoculars and long-lens cameras. They observed Samuel Kane visiting the ranch twice in his beat-up pickup truck. On the second visit, he was seen carrying a shovel into the old barn. This single observation was enough to elevate their suspicion to a near certainty. Something was happening at the Bishop Ranch, something that required a closer look. The pieces of the puzzle, after 5 long years, were finally beginning to fall into place. On August 28, 2023, armed with a search warrant, Detective Thompson led a team of deputies to the Bishop Ranch. The operation was planned for dawn, a time when they were most likely to find their suspect at home and off guard. Bishop was surprised by the sudden arrival of multiple police vehicles, but didn't resist. He denied knowing anything about a missing hunter and claimed he barely knew Samuel Kane, a lie that was quickly contradicted by the surveillance logs. The search began at the main house, but they found nothing out of the ordinary. The old barn, however, was a different story. It was located a quarter-mile from the house, partially hidden by a grove of pine trees, a place of shadows and secrets. The door was secured with a heavy, rusted padlock. Bishop claimed he hadn't been inside for years and had lost the key. When the deputies cut the lock and swung the heavy doors open, they were met with the musty, cloying smell of decay and damp earth. Inside, the barn was filled with old, dust-covered farm equipment and rotting hay. A cadaver dog was brought in, and it immediately began to show intense interest in a corner of the dirt floor that looked different from the rest. The ground was slightly sunken, and the dirt was looser, as if it had been disturbed more recently than the surrounding earth. The deputies began to dig, the silence in the barn broken only by the scrape of their shovels. Less than 3 feet down, they found it. Human remains, wrapped in a tattered blue tarp. The body was skeletal, the passage of 5 years having stripped it of all but the most durable tissues. But the remnants of a camouflage jacket and heavy hunting boots were still visible. In the pocket of the jacket, protected from the elements, they found a wallet. Inside was a driver's license, faded but still legible, with the name Mark Selby. A forensic examination confirmed what the investigators already knew. The remains belonged to Mark. The cause of death was determined to be a single gunshot wound to the back of the head, an execution-style killing. Arthur Bishop was arrested that day. He remained silent, his face a mask of stoic indifference, demanding a lawyer. Samuel Kane was apprehended the next morning while attempting to flee the state, his packed bags a clear indication of his guilt. Faced with the undeniable evidence of the body and the testimony of Daniel Cross, Kane decided to talk in exchange for a plea deal. He told the investigators the whole sordid story, his confession a chilling account of a chance encounter that had ended in murder. On that October morning in 2018, he and Bishop had been illegally poaching deer on Bishop's land when Mark Selby, who had unknowingly wandered off the public hunting grounds and onto the ranch, had stumbled upon them with a freshly killed deer. An argument ensued. Mark, a man who respected the law and the ethics of hunting, told them he was going to report them to the game warden. Kane, who had a prior felony and couldn't legally own a firearm, knew that another conviction would send him to prison for a long time. In a moment of cold, calculated panic, as Mark turned to walk away, Kane raised his rifle and shot him in the back. He and Bishop then buried the body in the floor of the barn, hiding Mark's rifle and backpack in a deep, abandoned well on the property. They drove his truck to the logging road to create the illusion that he had gone missing in the vast national forest. A clever and cruel deception that had worked perfectly for 5 long, agonizing years, leaving a family to wonder and hope in vain. The entire crime was a selfish, brutal act born of a desire to cover up a lesser offense. The trial was a somber affair, the grim details of the case casting a pall over the small community. Mark's wife and son sat in the front row every day, a silent, powerful presence in the courtroom, listening to the horrifying details of Mark's final moments. In the end, Samuel Kane was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Arthur Bishop, for his role in the murder and the cover-up, received a 20-year sentence. Daniel Cross, the man whose conscience had finally brought the truth to light, was given a small reward and relocated for his safety, forever looking over his shoulder. Justice, in a legal sense, was served, but it could never fill the void left by Mark's absence. Mark Selby was finally laid to rest in the Pine Ridge Cemetery, next to his parents, his long journey over at last. The simple inscription on his headstone reads, "A loving husband and father." He was lost, but now he is found. The disappearance of Mark Selby is a stark and tragic reminder of how an ordinary day, a day like any other, can turn into an unimaginable nightmare. A man went into the woods he loved, a place where he found peace and solitude, and never came out, his fate a mystery for years. All because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, a witness to a crime he never should have seen. Our hearts go out to the Selby family. We hope that with the truth finally revealed, they can find some measure of peace, some closure to their long and painful ordeal. Share this story. Keep the memory of the lost alive. Sometimes, attention is the only justice we have. Be good to yourselves and each other. Hug your loved ones tight. I'm your narrator. I'll see you a little farther down the trail. Some mysteries fade into the forest, never to be revealed. Subscribe and join us as we uncover what lies beyond.